Alexander is brilliant at knowing exactly how and when to change his attack or defense at a moment's notice. He sees how Porus's army is configured and immediately withdraws his heavy cavalry. Heavy cavalry against chariots and other heavy cavalry does not give him the best advantage.
What would be better tactically is to send his light cavalry to harass and stop the movement of the army. That's what he does. He sends in his Iranian horse archers. It's a trick he learned from fighting these very same people in the eastern approaches of the Persian Empire.
Alexander's light cavalry collides with young Porus's small force. And with that, the Battle of Hydaspes River begins. In 326 BC, the Battle of the Hydaspes River, one of history's most brutal battles, has begun. Alexander the Great's light infantry showers the approaching Indians with arrows. The Greek archers strike with a light, high-tech composite bow. Crafted from animal horn, the bow is layered with sinew from the legs of wild deer or antelope.
The MO for Alexander's horse archers is hit and run, hit and run. They don't wear armor. They don't really need to. They don't get close enough to the enemy to need it. And here they actually don't need it because the Indians don't have archers.
Thick cotton turbans protect their heads. Their torsos protected by a surprisingly strong quilted armor.
It was probably like a modern-day flak jacket, which you would imagine, you know, two layers of cotton, perhaps, or even wool, and in between those layers would be raw, unprocessed cotton. Well, believe it or not, the fibers of raw, unprocessed cotton are sufficient to stop an arrow.
Alexander's horse archers stop the Indian force and strip them of their mobility.
Their object is to take the steam out of the Indian cavalry attack and force them together. That's exactly what happens.
Once they're gathered together, almost immobile, that's when Alexander commits his heavy squadrons of heavy Greek cavalry, and they just smash right through the gathered Indian cavalry scattered.
The kopis is designed for slaughter. It has a forward-sloping blade for maximum impact on a downward strike. Once a butcher's tool, it works well on meat and enemies. The Indian chariot archers release a torrent of arrows against Alexander's infantry. But a small wooden shield covered with bronze protects the Greek infantry. The Indian arrows take their toll, but the conditions of the battlefield favor Alexander.
The rain the night before makes the battlefield a mud pit. These heavy chariots cannot maneuver their iron-shod wheels. They're absolutely useless in the mud.
The Indians are outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Close to 500 Indian cavalrymen are killed.
The chariots apparently never got into the battle, or if they did, they were completely ineffective. And they would be ineffective, essentially, against cavalry that could ride around it.
Among the dead is young Porus.
So Alexander is essentially now destroyed and brushed aside that reconnaissance force that Porus has sent.
The survivors retreat back to the senior Porus's camp. They tell him his son is dead, and that Alexander is indeed leading the main force. And they're heading this way.
By now, Porus understands that the Greek contingent across the river is just a fixing force, meant to paralyze him.
What Porus does at this point, he's still in danger of a cross-river attack, so he leaves a strong rear guard there to deal with that attack if it comes. He pulls the rest of the army out of the camp and starts to move it upstream to meet Alexander. About 3 hours later, they stop at a good battle site.
What the texts say is that the place where he found the first firm ground is where Porus deployed his army. Why would he be looking for firm ground? Well, there were two reasons. One is he had 200 chariots at his disposal. The second thing is elephants. Elephants are heavy, and you don't want them slipping and sliding all over the battlefield.
Porus positions his army. A few miles north, Alexander picks up reinforcements. Before he crossed the Hydaspes, Alexander, in addition to splitting his forces, had also stationed a reserve force midway between his main camp and the crossing point.
So he hadn't divided his army into two the night before. He'd divided it into three forces, and these reserves of about 4,500 infantry and 3,000 cavalry are fresh troops. They've gotten some sleep, they've marched half as far as Alexander's force, and they haven't seen combat yet.
The reinforcements cross the river and join Alexander's contingent.
So now, when you look at the force strength that Alexander commands, somewhere in the vicinity of 8,000 cavalry and somewhere in the vicinity of perhaps 15 or 16,000 infantry.
But Alexander's men are too spread out. The cavalry is in front, with the exhausted infantry dragging hours behind.
So as Alexander approaches the battlefield, sees Porus's army, he's in a situation where he has to delay the battle. How do you do that? He takes his Iranian horse archers and throws them forward. And they begin riding up and down the line, shooting arrows.
Now is the time when Porus should have attacked. Maybe he wasn't ready. Maybe he wasn't in an aggressive frame of mind. We don't know. But it looks like he was going to accept the battle that Alexander presented.
Porus has allowed Alexander the time for his infantry to arrive and to study the formation of Porus's troops. In front, a line of 200 battle-tested war elephants. Behind the elephants, an even longer line of 30,000 infantry troops, and on each wing a brigade of 1,000 cavalry to protect the flanks.
Alexander's infantry is outnumbered 2 to 1, so what he wants to do is turn this into a cavalry fight rather than an infantry fight. There's one problem: elephants.
Roman historian Curtius captures the scene. The beasts, stationed between lines of armed men, at a distance looked like towers, while Porus himself had almost exceeded the measure of human stature. The beast on which he rode seemed to add to his height.
The Greek Macedonians had never seen them in large numbers. Now, the individual fighting men wasn't too much of a problem. It was the horses. The horses had no exposure to these elephants, and the smell and sound and sight of them panicked the Macedonian cavalry.
Alexander must revise his tactical plan to make effective use of his cavalry, or this battle and his best chance to conquer India will be lost. Alexander has accomplished a difficult night crossing of the Hydaspes River. He's defeated a small Indian advance force. And now he's about to launch his attack against the full might of the Indian army.
The Indian infantry is twice as large as the Greeks. Alexander knows his strength as cavalry, where he outnumbers Porus 4 to 1. So the game is now how to fight a battle that's not an infantry battle.
Alexander had this phenomenal ability to very quickly read a battlefield and formulate a strategy to gain the advantage.
Alexander deploys his 4,000-strong cavalry squadron toward Porus's left flank. Porus only has a total of 2,000 cavalry, 1,000 on each wing. Porus orders his cavalry on the right wing to pull out of position, ride behind the battle line, and reinforce the left. And that's the mistake Alexander's been waiting for. Now Alexander orders Conus, one of his commanders, and 2,000 of his cavalry that had been heading for Porus's left flank to change direction and attack the defenseless right.
The 2,000 horsemen arrive on the right wing. There's nobody to fight. They turn the corner and ride all the way behind the Indian positions. It's a bizarre situation that's all but been brought about by Alexander's tactical brilliance.
As Conus and the 2,000 cavalry ride behind the Indian line, Alexander orders his horse archers to bombard the Indian cavalry with volley after volley of deadly missiles. Alexander then leads his elite brigade of 2,000 cavalry on a furious ride, swinging wide right and out past Porus's left flank.